The Butterfly's Dream by Kerberos 314, Chapter 25. Side note: whoever said that two heads are better than one has never actually had one in the first place. It's easy enough for a single mind to get caught up on something trivial, so multiple trains running rampant on the same track is a recipe for a wreck. We were better equipped than most to deal with this scenario, with myself acting as a switchboard, directing these ruminations to the right places. It felt like that was all I was doing, and we were getting nowhere. Not to say that I alone could have succeeded, though I wonder at first how much help Naruto truly was. There is something to be said about his drive, though direction was often wanting. I suppose it was my fault too, assuming we both knew what to look for. The goal was a far off mountain shrouded in the mist, and he was stuck looking at its shadow. In light of our insurmountable progress with saving the other Jinchuriki or solidifying the link between worlds, it was aggravating to me that we continually put off that work for his side quest of self-discovery. Things happened in this world that no one could ever have imagined, like life. Why make such an effort to inform other people of the truth if they were not inclined to search for it themselves? It is still difficult for me to completely banish this idea. Reasoning aside, it was impossible for me to deny my host his very need for this closure if it meant a return of focus. As the cause of the superior being I resolved to be to help him however possible. But again, I did not understand what that would entail. Thus, we came to this. Uzumaki-sama, it is good to see you out and about. Naruto, did you think any info on the other Jinchuriki? Or are you here for another spar? Confronted with the barest of two of the most powerful bloodline limits, those ancient animosity towards one another was put aside for the sake of being his friend slash rival. Naruto finally began to take my view and realized that this was potentially not a good idea, and yet he did it anyway. Sup, guys? No, unfortunately, that's not what this is about. Well, I guess it loosely ties in a very weird, roundabout sort of way. He waved off this tangent line upon realizing the impatient skepticism he was receiving from two fronts. No, this is something different. Do you remember the mission to rescue Gara, right? At the Akatsuki hideout with the barrier seal? Neji nodded, while Sasuke huffed. Of course. How often do I get to run you through with my sword and get away with it? Once was enough, thanks. Naruto twitched in irritation and further second guessing. Anyway, I guess that's a good place as any to start this. You can still back out, you know, I reminded him, not actually trying to be nagging. They won't think it that odd. I mean, they already know you're a little, what's the term, wacko, and they're still amicable enough. But the hand clenched around the scroll in his jacket pocket was not loosening, and it was obvious that he wasn't backing down. That was, after all, one of his most admirable traits. Argumentatively stupid, but admirable. Well, then, I guess you remember when I took off to deal with something right after it, yeah? The two stoic teens didn't bother so much as nod, as he was going to tell them either way. Well, this is that something. It must have been mandatory to wipe out those scrolls in a flamboyant manner, the unraveling parchment arcing wide in front of him as his lifeblood drew an unnecessarily long streak across its length. There was a cloud of smoke, too large to be for a simple weapon, even one as large as his new scythe, which made the two onlookers tense under duress. Sasuke, Neji, Naruto's voice cut in through the nerve-wracking haze, reassuring them somewhat. Meet Ruby. It was fair to say that this is not what they were expecting, any of them. Naruto had been fully prepared to be attacked, confounded, ridiculed, and possibly even drummed out of the shinobi corps with a dishonorable discharge, a possibility which at this point still hung in the air. The Uchiha or the Hyuga were likely preparing themselves for anything and everything, but were still surprised with the outcome. So, you guys have any more questions? Plenty. Sasuke paints the bridge of his nose, possibly contemplating the wisdom of their acquaintance, Shikamaru, and just flopping over on his back to stare at the candy floss clouds to clear out his brain. But not now. Nothing that you can possibly even answer anyway. Okay. How about you, Neji? Neji? I heard you the first time. The boy Jonin snapped, still not looking at him directly. The foci of his all-seeing eye had yet to leave the pale golem-like creature which Naruto had unleashed on them several hours earlier, the same which continued to act like a satellite to them, straying neither closer nor farther in her cautious orbit. A blind intuition that superseded her obvious want to overhear Naruto's long-winded explanation to his dubious friends. In a way, the way she dogged their heels like a stray made the invisible connection he was describing more believable. Logic aside, Neji's curtness was easily explained. If I were that straight-laced young man, and mind you, that's a big if, there would not nearly be enough brotherly love for my blonde host to refrain from maiming him at this point. And Naruto prompted, leaning in only to wipe back when the pale eyes turned to him. Neji heaved a long, suffering sigh. Like Sasuke said, there are many questions which you may not be able to answer, and which may or may not be relevant. For example, how did a part of her navigate its way here through the seal? How is this one different from the other guardian constructs? Is it the reflection on the original that it doesn't have chakra coils, or is that the byproduct of the transfer? How did you get this link in the first place? And perhaps most importantly, how did we not notice for so long? In contrast to the pale-eyed boy's severe tone, Sasuke snorted. We always knew he was weird. We just never questioned it. There was a disagreement for coming before the other boy conceded with a barely noticeable shrug. Naruto was admittedly a little perplexed. Not even his heartfelt confession with Tenten had been this smooth, and she knew him like the dimensions of a kunai. Maybe it was because she knew him so well, and both Sasuke and Neji fully admitted they did not. In their minds, there was still a big blank space reserved for Uzumaki Naruto, and this revelation was easily accommodated in that cover spot. So, you okay with this? The two shared an unreadable look, which made him once again regret even having asked, sweating in the long pause, which one could practically hear the sun's brilliant rays shining down on them. You were born with this, Sasuke began at last, chewing his own words as they came out. So it doesn't change anything. Your strength is still your own. It's like my Sharingan, both a blessing and a curse. Indeed, Neji picked up this point. Though I hesitate to compare it to my own mark of bondage, there is no denying that you had at once both accepted your fate and struggled against the limiting confidence. A small smirk that otherwise didn't quite belong on that painted face somehow made its way there. In any way, this actually helps to explain a lot about you, oh great and mysterious sage. For the first time, Naruto smiled at that title, though he still felt that he needed to do more to earn it. Your bonds have always been important to you, and I can finally see why. But still, he turned now to take over Neji's duty of watching over the knot, Ruby. What do we do with her? That was the question which begged an answer. What was she even? That was perhaps an even more important question that would dictate what they ought to do with her. It would be cruel of them to seal her back up in the scroll if she were truly living. The flip side to that was the knowledge that she was just an artificial construct, a trap created for the sole purpose of guarding its anchor. Now, deprived of that purpose, the not Ruby could be described as listless, but with an even more downtrodden air about her that almost made them want to take pity on the poor creature. Almost. At least it's not trying to kill any of us. They all agreed on this point. Well, shouldn't this be up to you? The raven-colored eyebrow was menaced upon Naruto. She is your sister or pet thing, and you were the one to capture her and let her out. Neji picked up where Sasuke had left off. Really? He questioned dejectedly. I confessed this to you guys so that you could help me with my problems. Is this the thanks I get for all my efforts? In the glance they shared, they could tell they thought he deserved something more than that, perhaps a good thump or two. But they forfeited this thought because in the long run they knew he would get them to help one way or another. You can't win against fools. Let's get this over with. Between a choice of blitzing the shy creature and cautiously approaching her, they chose the latter upon Naruto telling him that she was likely faster than any of them and didn't wish to test that. Ruby did not seem keen on them getting closer either way, but was less skittish around the blonde shinobi. Ruby, he stated passively with an arm outstretched to the too pale girl. Can you understand me? Your name is Ruby, you know, Ruby Rose. Do you remember me? My name is Naruto. Can you tell me how you got here? Silver eyes with tarnished luster flitted back and forth between the three shinobi, stalking slowly towards her. Even if she weren't distracted by the possible danger, there was the possibility that human language meant nothing to her. He tried again in English, just to be sure. Just hang back, you guys. They took the command hesitantly. After agreeing that they would help him, they felt uncomfortably sitting on the sidelines and resolved to stick as close as they could in case something would go wrong. There, now it's just you and me, all right? He took another tentative step towards the grayscale figure. I just want to talk. Can you please talk to me? If she didn't, well, there wasn't much point in keeping her around. Maybe I should eat her. He let out a noise which I didn't understand at first, but later figured to me that my suggestion wasn't appreciated. This was the flip side of the coin, and a tad irritating, as despite all his pretenses of being open minded, he failed to consider things from a different perspective. If I devoured part of Ruby's soul, perhaps that part would return to her through the bond. Maybe it was just a shadow, a doppelganger meant to deceive and soothe discord. A couple days inside my gullet would certainly purge it of evil. If nothing else, it would constitute good recycling. But no, humans never considered that kind of thing. What was that? He was not responding to me, though. He and leaned ever more curiously towards the living doll. It seemed impossible that she could have formed any words of her own beyond the pathetic mules heard in the background every now and then. Even if such a thing could talk, it would be put parroting. It would be but parroting what it had already been given, and not representative of thought. I'm sorry, Naruto. I didn't mean to cause so much trouble. I have been known to be wrong before. What? The creature hurled into a fetal position when confronted with the exclamation of surprise. It didn't take long for Naruto to figure this out and clamp his hands around his mouth before it got away from him. Again, Ruby, you talked. Keeping his tone to a minimum, he managed to close the distance between them, holding her firmly by the shoulders and trying to look her in those still lifeless eyes. And what do you mean, sorry? What's wrong? I attacked you? That doesn't matter. Still underneath his normal volume, he insisted empathetically. It's okay. You probably had no control over yourself, right? It's going to be all right. You're here now. You're here. The fragile form tensed within his desperate embrace, not even bothering to squirm. It just felt lifeless, cold, no different from stone. Ruby, you are here, aren't you? Wide marbles peeked out from the crack in his arms, turned to mud around them. I don't know. It would take another half hour to get more than a few sentences out of her, another few hours before anything useful surfaced. In all that time, they would be lucky the team's usual training ground would only be intruded by one other, Tenten coming to check up on him around noon when he hadn't returned to his apartment. Despite the shock she gave all four of them, it was relieving having another female present for some of the more personal questions. Numerous theories were tossed around for hours without any of them sticking. Most of the remaining time devoted to figuring out what to do with this semi-autonomous image, which was clearly not Ruby, but also clearly not without a form of life. A fraction of a person, perhaps an eighth up to three-fifths, were suggested, but no agreements were made, and no one could decide on what personal rights this status gave her. Putting her back in the scroll had been on the table. At least it had been until the fractured girl latched herself deathly upon Naruto's arm, cowering behind his meager protection. Then had enough animosity for the artificial creature to force this upon her again, and privately wondered just what sort of world existed within that dimensionless space to warrant such a reaction. They could have just asked me. Not enough bitterness, but not with enough sympathy to wish to keep her around. Better and worse in some ways than the fangirls who used to follow Sasuke like blood-sucking leeches. This one had no sense of private space, but was much sheerer around the prodigal Uchiha. Quieter too, though seemingly just as useless. Again, I suggested simply doing away with her, and again it was vehemently denied. What would be the point? It might even be less cruel to simply end its half-life right then and there. It didn't seem like she would contribute to anything, and they had since discovered that she was somehow more solid than Naruto Shadow clone, so evidently they would need to feed her. Another complication to the already troublesome situation. Eating her first meal began to look more and more appealing. Eating her first began to feel to look more and more appealing. That was before the weapon-obsessed woman made her infamous suggestion, something which even now I hesitate to dismiss as anything but unwise. But some are fond of saying, if it's stupid and it works, it isn't stupid. Hey, behind the warm wood counter, a blonde ponytail poked up like a periscope, a head and shoulders breaching the surface soon after. Tenten-san, this is unexpected, and understatement if ever there was one. The senior Kunoichi had an aversion to anything stereotypically feminine and was more likely to enter the morgue than the Yamanaka flower shop. For this reason, Yamanaka, who worked part-time in her family store and full-time as a konoha chunin, look askance to the one person of their generation she knew the least, and her equally foreign companion, who looked like she never set foot in the flower shop either, much less the sun. It was also for this reason that a heated discussion was going on across the street from the dubious concealment of a slated fence, three teenagers spying on the one with x-ray eyes, reading the mute conversation and relating the happenings to the rest. There's no way this is going to work. I don't know. It looks like it's working. It's unwise to make the prediction so soon, but I agree with Master Naruto in that she seems to believe the story, so far anyway. So, let me get this straight. That grace pierced so far appeared to be nearing its end as the blonde-haired clerk stared dubiously at her two guests on the verge of panic. This is Neji's third cousin twice removed from his mother's side, Tente lied fluently. You know how the Hyuga are. They don't really like to talk about family members if they don't have the Byakugan. She gave the uncomfortable girl by her side a half hug, putting on a appreciable look of for Ino's benefit. In an emotional plea that was almost as transparent as not Ruby's skin, there was little doubt that the Konoichi who specialized in her family's mind reading techniques would be able to sniff out in a heartbeat, provided, of course, she could be brought to think of the diminutive girl as an enemy, which was basically unthinkable as she almost disappeared in the two large clothes Tintin had lent her. If the sympathetic frown overcoming the sociable woman was any indication, it seemed to be working. The young Namanaka might have been an expert when it came to others' social behavior, but she had a bad habit of relaxing within the village walls and even turning that scrutiny inward. The story was only made more believable by not Ruby's muted expression, her already silvery eyes becoming so watery that they might have passed for a dormant form of the dojutsu. That and the two Kunoichi had a mutual acquaintance in a Hyuga who had an equally shy personality. Say, does she remind you of anyone? Peeking through the crack, Sasuke considered the portion of the girl he could see through the shop window, bodily averting herself from Ino's overbearing attention and fiddling her hands together nervously. Of course she's familiar to you. Haven't you known her all your life? Well, yeah. Naruto waved his hands towards his friend, both unaware of the mortified twitch from their third member listening in. But not this one. She's way different than how Ruby normally is. It's like something made her super shy all of a sudden, and that's what seems familiar. Like who? I don't know. That's why I'm asking you, moron. Would you two keep it down? We're supposed to be hiding. Without even raising his voice, Neji managed to browbeat the two into obeying, and when they were finally behaved, he silently heaves a sigh of regret for his cousin. It was a shame, but Hinata Hyuga would have to be literally tied to the hip for Naruto to ever take notice of her reticent affection. So, she wants a part-time job here? Tenten nodded, gently shoving the shorter girl in front of her, squeezing a small eep out of the living wind-up doll, just while she's visiting, and until they could find out what to do with her. Though the more time she could actually spend around the village, and around Naruto's friends in particular, the more effective this effort would be. The idea was to get people accustomed to the girl's face and presence, so that if and when he decided to break the news to the rest of them, they would have an easier time to accept it. Oh, come on, girl. You don't want to work here. Being her usual egregious self, Ina sidled up to Ruby and, to the girl's obvious discomfort, snatched her away from Tenten's care. You should be out having fun. If you're visiting, why do something so boring? I know I want to do every exciting thing I could before I had to get back to the day-to-day grind. The girl's temporary guardian followed too closely as Ina traipsed around the shop with not Ruby in tow. It was only a matter of time before the blonde's oblivious enthusiasm gave one of them a heart attack, though in the end it was Ino who perhaps got the biggest scare when the slip of a girl under her arm disappeared in a gush of wind. Please, Yamanaka-san. The two turned in surprise to find the pale-faced Ruby at the far end of the shop, hands clasped together and bowed in penitence. I really would like to work. I don't want to be a burden. The ball was back in her court, but for once the expressive woman did not know how to react. Still perplexed as to how someone without a shinobi bearing could move so quickly, never without words for long, she soon took the episode in stride, with a confident smile redrawn on her face. You know, I don't think I ever caught your name. Her extra pale skin made the rosy blush even more prominent, all but bleeding in with the backdrop of camellia before she stooped even further to the floor. What was that? She asked with an amused curl to her lip, perhaps finding a twisted sort of pleasure in the girl's bashfulness. My name is Rose. Ruby. Not Ruby, mumbled a little bit louder, barely above Tenten's sigh of relief, hearing the last name come out first. Rosu. The fascination with her name made the girl even more uncomfortable than before, not simply marveling over the strangeness. There was a familiarity in the elder woman's voice which now made her worried. Like Bara, the flower? It took even less time for her to locate an example amid the shop than it did to make the connection. Simply reaching over and plucking one from a prearranged bouquet, she held it up between them, sighting the two like looking down the barrel of a loaded gun. Finally, letting her arms drop, she sighed as she twirled the barbed stem expertly in between her fingers. I think I found our new delivery girl. Perhaps she should have been more perturbed, but wasn't. In all honesty, she had completely forgotten about her copycat in the other world until this point. During the first introduction of this creature, she had still been struggling with her mental shackles, and seeing something that was supposed to be herself in such a spot seemed even less real than the rest. Being so blatantly reminded of it, there was no question of its significance. Like a body on the autopsy table, all it took was one willing glance to identify it as part of herself. This thought was sickening to her, knowing that a piece of herself should look that wretched. All at the same time, there was no rebuking it. If anything, whatever fragment of her had meandered over to Naruto's world only served to further her positive outlook about the whole thing. While a little embarrassed to be so dependent on him, nothing would contradict her certainty of that whatever arose, Naruto could handle it. All the complications envisioned by his friends and naysayings by yours truly were going to prove baseless, finding it hard to think of this as anything but a good thing. In fact, the issue of not Ruby, whom Ino insisted on calling Bara-chan from then on, proved a great distraction from the complicated questions surrounding the actual link. Everyone was so concerned with what to do with her that she slipped into their lives unknown like a foxtail. Ma, don't worry about it, Naruto-kun. I have room enough in my loft to put her up. Besides, this may be the only chance I'll get to spend time with someone so special to you. Good, reliable Tenten. Ruby wouldn't forget this favor, repaying it by proving her wrong. They would meet some day, face to face. The entirety of her, of this, there was never any doubt. Are you even listening? Not quite as reliable as the bun-haired woman as the weapons mistress. Ruby had to play catch up to the discussion which went over her head. A predictable sigh relieved her from having to try too hard. What's the purpose of you even coming here if you're just going to space out the whole time? Sorry, she grinned sheepishly with one hand massaging her raven red locks. I brought today's notes from Port's and Oobleck's class, though. The pages were torn from her hand with a huff, pale blue eyes rapidly scanning the typewriter-like lines, with an occasional wince from the nurse's ministrations down by her leg. There we are. The purple-bobbed medical assistant gave the girl an obligatory smile before her surgical mask, bundling up the solid bandages before disposing of them in the hazardous material bin by the bedside. You should be good to go now. Just try not to irritate it too much. Change the bandages out every other day and avoid taking too hot showers, all right? Ruby was the only one to nod her thanks as the middle-aged woman excused herself, simply rolling away backwards on her swivel chair with a childish glee. Weiss must have noticed the eccentric exit, for her eye gave a different kind of twitch to that of the pen and sighed as she let the papers fall onto her lap. The ones for Port's class are useless. We never cover anything in there anyway, and everything for Oblix is directly from the book. But did you notice my sketch? She asked, pointing to the rather well depicted graphic of what happened when John's red pen accidentally exploded behind his ears, transforming the blonde into his team's second redhead for the rest of the day. Yes, Ruby cowered under the venom imbued words before being observed as her partner practically leaped out of the hospital bed. Let's go already. Wait! Equally obedient to the single word, Weiss stopped with legs dangling over the edge of the mattress, though not deigning to look her captain in the eye. Weiss, before we head back, I need to know. Despite the miscommunication which overreached the first few months of their partnership, there somehow existed a non-verbal understanding on some level between the two, such that the upright woman had no need for the thought to be complete to know what Ruby was referring to. I admit the world's a vastly different place from what I expected. Leaving her home of Atlas for the sole purpose of escaping from under her father's thumb, she rightfully had no real expectations of what she would find outside her prison of white gold. I suppose I wanted things to make sense and to have more freedom and options for myself. I see now that those things are in a way contradictory. The way my father does things, the order he so admires, means obedience, and I think I can understand him better now. Freedom can be a dangerous and terrifying thing. People are just naturally going to be different, and there's no guarantee that they'll think like you. Giving her partner a long, hard look, Weiss registered the hopefulness in the stare she was receiving. That means I don't have to agree or even believe in what you think. In a way, she was disappointed, but more than that, she was frustrated and upset with that obstinate attitude. It was a physical effort to restrain the toxic thoughts from creeping up through her chest. A sigh like the release of steam deflated that overwhelming. But I suppose I don't have to do either of those things to work with you. I just have to trust in your skills and abilities to lead. So far, I think I can do that. Just like that, the conviction that never left surmounted all her other thoughts. Thank you, Weiss. Don't thank me, she huffed officially. Just don't disappoint me. She would keep the bandages on her legs on another few days, finally letting them accelerate the healing only after enough of the tissue had been mended naturally and imperfectly to leave a slight sheen of scar tissue running up the side of her calf. Nothing that would be noticeable upon first glance, and something which would disappear under any sort of stockings or high boot, but it would tingle upon a coming storm, fight against a deep stretch, and chafe against any attempt to cover it up. For the woman raised on a diet of perfection, it was another reminder, like the one above her eye, that perfection was often the price to pay for something better, the currency to exchange for experience. The other three clearly had no idea what to expect of being called up to the headmaster's office several days after their complicated mission. As such, they relied on their captain, who put on a stiff upper lip for their benefit. "Oh, hello, Tim, Ruby. Glad to see you all up and well." Against expectations, they found the headmaster along with 4 cups of cocoa waiting for them in front of the imposing desk, the legendary man stretching his legs and looking out at the vista of Vale. This might have been even more unnerving than simply being debriefed, however, and it took a while before the four found their way to the individual mugs. Skull, they looked blankly as he tipped the rim of his own drink towards them. It means cheers. Forgive me, Ospen, sir. Some hesitation to follow suit. Weiss, in particular, just cradled hers with a bitter dip in her mouth. Drink first, then we talk. Not expecting this condition, she turned to the brown liquid with lips parted, looking for answers there. After all, he began after a modest sip, I think you four deserve a little celebration, no? There was a handful of swallows, so marking this conclusion, uncomfortable with this casual praise. Roman Torchwick and his accomplice have been detained, the dust crime ring thwarted, it would seem. There was something in his voice which struck us as not quite convinced, but ignored to hear what else he had to say. Not bad for what? Eighth week of eighth week of school? cautiously. A few smiles creaked the grave atmosphere, making them believe they had just imagined the sense of doubt. The drinks in their hands were very real, the warmth both inside and out far easier to accept. That being said, I would appreciate it in the future if you would try your best on these sorts of missions to not get picked up by the local authorities. As off-handed as this addendum was, it nevertheless caused a few gagging noises behind his back, or, at the very least, refrain from excessive property damage. Ruby very tactfully averted attention being drawn to her with a low sip which kept her mouth from running amuck. Surely she couldn't hold that against her, could he? The building was already old and crumbling. Besides, it hadn't been her who fired the rockets in an enclosed space, and she had just added a skylight or two. More like one big hole which successfully divided the property in half. Wait, in the future, does that mean you're going to be sending us out some more? Osmond chuckled, striding over to his desk and absently looking through some of the scattered papers. But of course, just because one problem has been taken care of doesn't mean the duty of huntsmen and huntresses is done. As the one who asked the question, it was Weiss's turn to hide her chagrin behind an admittedly satisfying sip. That is, if you still wish to continue with this pace. I could, of course, have you wait until the second semester when the rest of your classmates begin to take missions and keep you at the introductory level. The thinly veiled challenge made Ruby chuckle, especially glancing at her sides, where she could see an almost equally fire of determination in her partner's eyes as her sister's. But there was also a dark contempt there for the one she who knew where this all led, what the tasks were building towards. Even then she would not pretend to know all of what was behind the headmaster's moves, but trusted her instinct to pull her back well enough away from the invisible cliff they might be approaching. I have no problem with it, Young declared, slamming back the rest of her drink as if to show that she was ready enough to go again right there and then. Maybe you could tell our teachers to let up on the homework in that case. The question like a flitting tail. Blake glanced sideways upon her suggestion. Just a little. There was no disappointment, and a little humor when the proposal was shot down. They were being given a chance to prove themselves, not a bonus. The shortcut up the mountain was just as hard, only with fewer switchbacks. By the time they left, the sugar had permeated their bloodstreams and brought them to a new high, where those challenges no longer seemed too daunting, and an even level above the clouds, where they could almost see one another clearly for the first time. So, you guys are really okay with it? All right with me continuing to be your leader? The self-doubt had long since been removed from her being, bound and carted off to places unknown, and yet the question still had to be asked. It was part of self-preservation, the paranoia of betrayal always there, because as long as humans were human, the unexpected would never disappear. All was silent in the elevator car except for the gentle hum of the electromagnetic guides. As several glances were shared behind her back, Ruby's eyes fixated instead on the slowly changing numbers. Ha! The expression made her lurch, that strange sickening feeling there once where one's body was going down and the organs trying to leap through the throat. But a hand pressed upon her scalp, ruffling her hair and keeping her tied to the floor. Even if you weren't my sister, I wouldn't give up this chance for the world. I don't think I've ever had such a fun night out on the town. Letting the blonde's hand rest there a while longer, her own clenched and trembled by her sides, not with fear, but trepidation, but with a solemn vow. I swear I will protect you all. It was but a whisper in the coffin-like confines, but you should have expected at least one to pick up on it. It's not the leader's job to constantly protect their subordinates. Blake's aside was a non sequitur to the others and drew their attention to the normally soft-spoken woman. Rather, to make sure that they can take care of themselves and give them an example of what to strive for. Ruby returned the shy smile she saw in the chrome door's shining reflection, a bit more weight removed from her shoulders, so with that vote of confidence, waiting yet for that last digging burden to be relieved. In the extraordinary long ride, all three hung upon that last voice of assent. Probably lost in her own thoughts, Weiss either didn't notice or chose to hold off until the last second, waiting upon the doors opening back up to the normal world where only misunderstandings and strangeness awaited them. That place where their true thoughts couldn't be voiced, but the only place so they would have truly mattered. She brushed past her leader, ignoring the stone-like stillness in that portal behind her. I already told you, she spoke without turning around. I don't need to believe you, to believe in you. The serious stare which she turned and leveled at Ruby was for her own benefit, the furrowed brow only there to protect her own hopes, as fragile as the ice-blue orbs sandwiched in between. Don't let me down. That was easy enough for Ruby, but it wasn't up to her now, was it? You wanted to see me? Rapping slightly on the door frame before sticking her head in, showing a modicum of courtesy such that it mattered at this late day. Goodwich's office hadn't changed, still as ancient and tidy as it had been every previous time. Not that there had been that many, mind. Modest, a desk with a modest lamp, throwing modest amounts of light on the modestly sized space, full of modest decorations that betrayed nothing but a modest career. In fact, the only things which did not fall into their trend were the two massive bookshelves flanking either wall and the woman herself. Even trying to appear as approachable as possible with her open door policy, Glinda was no different than a caged tiger, green eyes tracking her the moment she stuck her head in through the portal. Not that she was scared or frightened of the woman or what she represented. Deputy headmistress she may be, but Ozpin had the final say in things, and any punishment within her power would be nothing compared to what she had already endured. Miss Rose, yes, please do come in. No, she was not frightened, not even by that almost congenial lilt which threw her off guard. Have a seat. Sliding into the surprisingly soft, upright chair until she slouched, she mused with a sideways head on the book's titles whilst Glinda finished up whatever it was she was doing when she entered, humming a soft tune under her breath. She kicked her legs to an unknown rhythm. No, she was not afraid, just wasn't sure what to expect. There was a difference, especially to her. Goodwitch might have been the second in command right after Ozpin, but how much did she know? Of her, of Ozpin himself, she wanted no part in any school politics, if that was what this meeting was about. Neither did she want to step on any toes by revealing too much or too little. Sheathing her antiquated fountain pen with a small click, Glinda deliberately took the paper she was grading and set it on a stack with all the others, so that she had nothing but her folded hands in front of her. How are you doing, Miss Rose? Rapidly Ruby blinked in the face of this meaningless human platitude. I know it has been a while since I promised to speak with you, but as I understand it, we have both been quite busy. A promise? Was that what it had been? Would a command by any other name have gotten her in that door? Yes, I guess I have, nodding to accept the woman she was working for, Ozpin unconsciously sitting up in the velvet backed chair. Fine. Apart from that, I suppose. Good. Care to tell me what happened the other day, then? Another right turn? Was she doing this on purpose just to throw her off guard, or was the woman as simple as she seemed, upfront about both her staunchness and her caring for those trusted to her guard? I admit, when a long pause followed that question, I listened with rapt attention for the answer. Ruby hadn't even told Ozpin about me yet, and nor explained what she knew about what was happening to her psyche. Whatever fascination the man held for her application, he was not telling. But what if Linda did the head know what the hand was doing at all times? She did not strike an impression as a woman who would betray a trust to either her students or to her superior. Neither did she seem conniving as the headmaster. Admittedly, I have misjudged before and relied on Ruby and Naruto for that reason. There were doubts, though, as to whether Ruby was in the right mind to make that assessment. I knew she lacked an outlet for her confession like Naruto had. She was strong, but I just hope that she knew when and what to keep a secret. What do you mean? There had been too much of a delay, and even before Goodwitch frowned, Ruby recognized it was a foolish thing to say. I'm not going to punish you, if that's what you're worried about. It wasn't. I just want to know how you are doing. I understand that this is a stressful time with everything going on, though obviously I cannot imagine the difficulty of accepting what was done to you. I can at least commiserate on the stresses of school and the missions that you have been taking on top of it. I just want to make sure that you are not causing yourself undue harm. Believe it or not, I do worry about all of my students. reports and homework on top of late night escapades was certainly not helping, but there was little that could be done about what was on the forefront of her mind. Certainly nothing Glinda could do, even if she were to be let into the loop. "Thank you, Miss Goodwitch," she said sincerely, unknowingly bowing her head more than was normal for polite conversation. "I'm not going to lie and say that it's a breeze handling all of it, but I'm not going to complain either. It's not about complaining, Ruby. It's about knowing your limits and getting the support you might need." The prior she had been well versed in, as strange as it sounded. The second was something she was still getting used to. She'd started with a wide base. Her father, Yang, Crow, and of course Naruto. Adding Coco and Velvet had been the pinnacle of her greatness before she'd fallen hard. Slowly building back up now, it was a tempting offer to reach for. Though, once bitten, she was careful now above where she stuck her hands. "I understand. That's why you put us in teams after all. Not even your team can always help you. There will be things above your capabilities. Then there will be disputes between the four of you. Not even the best of friends will see eye to eye all the time." Now she was speaking from experience, and not even the flat light from the single fluorescent bulb could wipe away the lines of age from her face. "You probably already know what with your sister. I just want you to know that I'm here to talk if you need another option. Right? Not afraid, no, just uncomfortable with the direction this was taking. She wanted to end it before she took the woman up on her offer. "Thank you, Miss Goodwitch. I think I'm all right for now, but I'll keep it in mind." "That's all I can ask," sounding more jagged than relieved. Guessing that was her cue to exit, Ruby quickly but considerably got up from the chair and made her way to the door, not feeling Glinda's eyes following her because they were staring at the empty spot on her desk. "Just remember, my door is always open." Not being able to say anything, she gave a tight lip nod and disappeared into the encroaching night. Burned in her mind, the pale blonde hair and the somber green eyes bleached under that unflinching lamp. Her investment seemed genuine even to me. "Oh, Glinda, if only you could know which side of the cage you were on. Your door may always be open, but if you dare step foot into the rabbit hole, there's no promise that you'll ever return." Heading back to their own hole were Bara, Ruby, and Tenten, the latter having just come to collect the girl from her first full day of work, and the former following hazily, lost in perpetual inner turmoil. Naruto's clone tracked them as it had all day, every day. If Tenten knew, she made no gesture of it, concentrating on trying to get the other girl to open up. It was starting to look like a futile effort, as even with the constant exposure to an extrovert like Ino, she had yet to peek from her shell. Futile or pointless? Pointless was his over concern for his friends, silent guarding when he should know they could take care of themselves. Futile was something not worth doing because it was impossible. I doubt he realized the difference and continued along with both because stubbornness was his most admirable trait. Sometimes watching events unfold was all you could do, and the closest of watches couldn't always stop things from happening, couldn't make things change. Watching this pot slowly boil was the same. This was Ruby, and it was not a gross representation or an embryo that would never fully develop, a singular aspect, an immute avatar of some quality that he still couldn't quite place, unchangeable and therefore not alive. None of that pointlessness could stop him from keeping vigil. They would be back soon anyways. Okari, whoa! The cheerful greeting was punctured with a kunai embedded itself in the kitchen cabinet right above his head. "Naruto!" One hand still extended in a throw and the other pressing the scrawny body of Ruby out the recently opened door. "What are you doing in my apartment?" True, they usually end up at this place, probably because even Neji admitted that that atmosphere in his clan's compound was stark and a bit off-putting. That and Naruto himself kept the most erratic hours. Over the years, waking up with no set schedule, his presence there shouldn't have been such a surprise though, should it? Facts aside, if he didn't say the right thing in the next 3 seconds, there was no doubt that she had enough weapons to make sure even his individual dispersed molecules within the Shunshin would be pinned to the wall. "Making dinner?" "Oh!" Lips rounding and mimicking the clipped expression, she suddenly reanimated. "Great. Should I set the table?" Come on, Bara-chan, close the door on your way in. The Avatar girl clearly preferred to go in the exact opposite direction, but had no choice as she was dragged in by his teammates' insistent grip. Going back to his shimmering pot, Naruto watched out of the corner of his eye as she fidgeted nervously in the foyer for a spell before tiptoeing about her new formal. He sighed. Why did he even bother? Itadakimasu Itadakimasu. Tenten was the only one who followed his expression by digging into her meal with gusto, a hard day of training preceding it for the both of them. Not that he wasn't also hungry, and not that his sukiyaki wasn't delicious, which I can say is utterly true, but he simply ended up pushing bean sprouts around his plate, picking up a moist glob of rice now and then, much like how Ruby was doing. It was supposed to be a happy time, something he had waited his entire life for, but no matter what it looked like, this wasn't it. Not a happy moment, not a comfortable setting, not a family, not a splat! The cube of tofu stuck there on his forehead like a sponge, slowly sliding down his face and leaving a savory brown streak along with foreboding silence in its wake. He looked up slowly, not even glancing at the ruby avatar who had shrunken beneath the table until just fearfully wide, tiny eyes were peeking out. His slack-jaw stare was reserved for his teammate who sat across from him, blinking as if she couldn't believe her lobbing shot had struck home. At least that was before she broke into a wide grin of madness and panic, snatching up a wad of rice from her bowl and flicking it his way. Prepared this time, he moved his head out of the way, letting the snowy white projectile deform against the window. Hey, what the heck was that for? I worked hard on this, you know. Fishing around it in her bowl for another round, Tintin stopped, and the juvenility of what she'd just done caught up to her. Ow! Rubbing her eye free of the spice flakes and staring at the languishing piece of lamb that had flopped on the table, she could only register his deranged cackle. It's only fair I get the first shot at the boy. It's on. It was a waste of good food. Scratch that. It was a massacre of desperate needed substance. Each mouth-watering bite flung haphazardly to land against a piece of furniture or some unlucky body would have brought a tear to my eye if I had the ability to cry. I guess I kind of do, but only when one of them was. And right now, the only tears being shed were ones of joy, as both he and Ruby were laughing like loons. Even this Ruby, this pathetic imitation, had been caught up in the madness of clones and chaos. Comestibles and consumable laughter. All three found themselves drunk on these bachelin reveries because there was something they needed even more despite desperately than food. I have no need to eat, though can appreciate taste. I have all the benefits of life and none of the detriments, none of the wicked motives associated with hunger, lust, vengeance need apply, and yet I know of them. It should make sense that there are some commonalities which transcended all life. Amusement, joviality, happiness, light emotions to lift one up and to illuminate the way. Did I ever have these before the kids showed up in my life? It is hard to remember and easy to forget. Spending too much time in those dark thoughts, getting accustomed to their chill doesn't make you a better person. Just numb. Hey, you guys, we just came to check up on you too. Whap, splat, floosh, tonk, tonk, tink, 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 frim. Sasuke looked first to the three pairs of owlish eyes staring at him from the cover of a sofa, dining table, and most recently behind the potted plant near the transept, which was sporting a full-body blush at what it just done. Then he looked at the now motionless empty turn on the floor by his feet, last to the equally mute boy by his side, traditionally white Hugo robes completely drenched with the salty meat broth. The room, nay, the world held still for several labored breaths. A finger swiped across his dripping brow. Pretty good. Less salt though, I think. That's because he needs everything to taste like ramen. Oi! Misunderstandings aside, I knew that the dialogue would await. No words were required because no words could describe this need. Meditation by depriving a body of stimuli and this mind-numbing orgy of sensation were both the same. Sometimes one just needed to shut up and stop thinking. End of chapter 25.